from project to business integration with NFTs, and I would love to bring those ladies to the stage to share their experience with us today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to NFT.NYC. Continuing on the trend of talking about fashion and NFT brands, we today will be hosting a panel talking about how real-life brands can partner with NFT projects to have metaverse adoption strategies. We'll be talking a lot about what activations might look like, barriers to entry for brands to consider, and how both NFT projects can leverage the fashion industry and vice versa. But before we dive into those topics, let's introduce ourselves. Hello, everyone. My name is M. In real life, I go by Elissa, but in the NFT metaverse world, I go by M. I'm the CEO of Crypto Chicks, which is a generative NFT collection that depicts women and is created to celebrate and uplift women in the NFT and Web3 space.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zay. I'm the creative director for Gossape Girl NFT project. So we launched our project back in January of this year. So yeah, like the collection itself is 5 months old, and our mission is to introduce the feminine aspects and fashionable aspects to the blockchain. So yeah, over to Syama.
Hi guys, I'm Syama. I'm the business. I'm a business strategist. I got off my career building businesses at Barney's, at Gucci, where I ran a division. For the last 10 years, I've been a co-CEO to a number of visionary founders in early growth stage startups, launching the first Bitcoin ATM machine with a client of mine in 2014. So a long time ago. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hello, everybody. I am Zino Haro, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Unique. That's UNI-KE. We are a company that connects small and growth stage brands with manufacturers at a global scale with the purpose of streamlining the fashion supply chain. And over the past year, we've been working to integrate from manufacturers all the way to the Web3 consumers through the usage of 3D manufacturers in the standard supply chain space. On a more personal note, I have a computer science degree from Columbia University where I specialize in digital systems and cybersecurity. My introduction to blockchain was actually hacking one in 2018. And then in terms of fashion, I've been showing in New York Fashion Weeks at the age of 19 since 2017. I've also participated with Seoul Fashion Week and most recently Digital Fashion Week.
Awesome, thank you. So to kick things off, let's start with the NFT project perspective. Z, can you tell us a little bit about how NFT projects can tap into the fashion industry?
I think that's a very interesting question. But before I answer that question, I think it will be also like beneficial to understand like why fashion. Because like if we look at the art collectibles, like all the NFTs and the PFPs, they're all like here to represent someone. So like it's actually a way for a person to express themselves. So people would pick like a PFP that would resonate with my energy or like someone else's energy. So the art collectibles is actually a way to express someone. And I believe that why fashion is because like a lot of people actually see like PFP brand as like a brand and a lifestyle. So like in order for like an NFT project to have a longevity, then like it needs to be like embedded not only in Web3 but also in the Web2 in people's daily lives. So I think it's very important for like NFT brands to tap into like people's lifestyle and Web2 life. And I guess like fashion is just one of the ways to do that. And as for like at Gossape Girl, we believe that we want to tap into fashion because that is actually like one of the ways that we can encourage women and also like all other genders to learn more about the Web3 space. Because like as we all know, fashion is like a common language that everyone can be like interested to learn more. So yeah, I think that's.
I love what you say about the fact that fashion is really this digital representation of ourselves. Just quick personal anecdote. I joined Crypto Chicks, the project that I'm now the CEO of, but first as a community member. Before that, I was investing a lot in the kind of gender ambiguous animal profile picture projects, and I found that a lot of time people were assuming I was a man every time I was communicating online. And then as I found Crypto Chicks as an investor, I thought, this is incredible. I finally have a digital representation of myself, my identity. It has a shirt that I like to wear. It has earrings that match earrings that I have in real life. It wears similar makeup to me. And that was kind of the first time that I realized that as we're adopting this sort of metaverse vision for the world and for the future, allowing people to have what they would normally do in the real world to represent themselves, replicate that in their online experiences is super important. But I think we've also seen in the past 6 or so months that the NFT industry has really started to explode. There's a lot of brands and a lot of companies that are starting to think about, okay, this is a whole new era of how we are engaging with communities, engaging with consumers, engaging with potential fans of our brand. We've seen, as we heard on some of the earlier panels, there are some brands that have done a great job of entering this space. There are some brands that have done not so great of a job entering this space. So Syama, I would love to hear if you can talk a little bit about, from the brand perspective, how can they tap into the fashion industry? What are the barriers to entry and things that they should be considering?
Absolutely. You know, I think what's important is, I'm so excited we talk a lot about art and creativity, but I don't think we often talk enough about P&Ls and budgeting and planning and how to actually map out KPIs as a brand, and what does an activation fully look like end to end, and what is the actual invitation, right, longer term. And so I think there are too many examples at this point of brands that have not done it right. And so when I look at best practices, right, because we're so early in the space, we actually don't know which projects and brands are going to actually have legs further on. So my approach is actually to start to think about, what is the longer term game plan, and how do you budget to actually be in the space to iterate over time? Now, unfortunately, we either see big players who have big budgets who say, hey, we can play and throw at this, but when it comes to smaller independent designers, right, having access to the technology to building a ready-to-wear collection as well as digital, it gets expensive, right? So barriers to entry, I think, are, as a young brand, picking a lane that you're going to start with, right? So I'm going to start and put my eggs in the basket on digital fashion, maybe then look to release physical goods. Or I'm going to start with my ready-to-wear or clothing accessories collection and then start to drop in later on, right, what these NFTs and digital fashion can look like. So I think budget is a big issue. And then looking, I think, longer term at the fact that whatever you build today will likely have to be rebuilt again as we start to define the platform. So budget, I think, is number one, and future planning. Unfortunately, I think brands that don't get it right or aren't very thoughtful just really risk losing their consumer base. And I think customers and community, as you mentioned, are number one priority.
I have more of a business-to-business perspective in the supply chain aspect. So the use of NFTs outside of consumers between businesses. I can think of 3 main use cases. One would be product traceability, data sharing, and then finally supply chain collaborations. When it comes to product traceability, one big event that a lot of people can think back to is what happened at Rana Plaza in Dhaka, where, for example, Gucci and Versace had no idea that some of their products were being made there, and that was a lot of loss of information within the supply chain. So that is one potential use case in terms of transitioning one product from one supply chain point to the next. When it comes to data sharing for the consumers, the end product could potentially have an NFT tag, not in the purpose of, hey, I want to trade it, I want to sell it, but just for the storage of information. I don't think that a lot of brands right now are prepared to share everything about where the products come from, partially because they don't even know themselves. But this is a potential use case as we go into brands caring about how they look to their consumers. Are they sustainable? Can they compete with up-and-coming brands that are targeting the younger audience? That's one potential use case as well. Finally, for supply chain collaborations, we've already sort of seen it start to happen between P&G and Walmart. The use case for this is that traditionally in the supply chain, you have a lot of different players, and between all of these players, when you want to transfer operations between one company to another, you need to submit a lot of different data points, and these often get lost in the shuffle. I haven't really seen many startups or companies working on this. I don't know if it's just a very obscure part of the supply chain, but that's definitely an idea. One drawback to this solution is that the power dynamic between the two competing or cooperating companies cannot be too large, especially with knowledge. So the only reason that it works with P&G and Walmart is because they're both such global forces. They both have so much resources, so much money, and they can hire the best of the best to do this to make sure that nothing goes wrong. When you're a smaller brand, that's a lot more difficult to implement. I could see it, for example, if there's one player that does this, and then they connect with all the small brands, and then they do that for them. That would be definitely a very good way to approach this. But it is useful in terms of just quickly transferring your supply chain operations.
Yeah, I think supply chain is one of the big areas where there's a lot of opportunity for innovation and also a good opportunity for brands to showcase how they can differentiate themselves in the market. There's a huge consumer base that cares a lot about sustainability and also transparency within sourcing of materials and everything, and using NFTs as a way to understand how basically the shirt that you're wearing has been made is really valuable for a lot of end consumers. Syama?
You know, I have a great brand example of this. There's a company, it's actually my PFP, it's called Mavion. And what I love about this business model is that the company first started off as just a global marketplace for brands, right? An opportunity to highlight small batch, one-of-a-kind sort of products, which I think are great from a, produce only what you need, produce on demand. Now, with the pivoting and the introduction of Mavion, what they're doing is actually allowing for the creators of these products, right, to receive the royalties of the sale of those NFTs, by which in the NFT is actually an accessory, which at the time of capturing the holders of the NFT, as an owner, you get a product, right? So an amazing way of looking at sustainability, how we're giving back to our creators when it comes to physical products, who often obviously tend to get exploited.
That's one of the projects I love too. I think it's incredible that they have figured out a way to create an opportunity for people who would traditionally be left out of something that's such a big technical revolution that you need to have the resources and the R&D departments and the engineers and the 3D modelers that these big brands have in order to participate in this. But it's a really life-changing opportunity in terms of that long-tail revenue that a creator can get. If you think about someone who makes a custom handbag, they sell that, they only get the revenue on the first sale. They don't get anything from secondary sales thereafter as it changes hand if someone sells that bag on, say, eBay or Poshmark, one of the secondary marketplaces. And so this is a really big opportunity for a lot of designers and independent small business owners to be able to tap into that ecosystem and build communities and networks around what they're making. So really excited from that. I think one of the things, Syama, that you talked about that we can dive a little bit deeper into is from the brand perspective, considering budgeting is obviously a big thing on a lot of these brands' minds. Understanding metaverse. It sounds so shiny, it sounds so exciting. Usually there's an executive that has decided that this is something that a brand really wants to approach in this particular quarter. Maybe they have an OKR about it. And one of the things that I think a lot of brands are struggling to understand is how to actually get there. What are the things that they need to think about from specifically budgeting, but also metrics for success? How should they be measuring their KPIs for the brand? And I'd love to hear thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. I think what you mentioned is something really important, which is when we're thinking about things like Web3, which I think most people who are honest are like, what are we defining? And so when I'm working with brands, I think what's important is to understand there is blockchain as a technology to what you were talking about in terms of traceability. That's one channel. That has nothing to do with selling NFTs, PFPs, anything, right? There's the technology component. Then you actually have kind of the community building component, which I think is more of the NFT launches and how do you bring people together. And then you also have the metaverse component, right? Which is another opportunity for community building and, to be honest, a whole separate strategy and budget that you're planning for. And so I think the number one thing right now when it comes to how do we plan out our budgets, the first thing I'm doing is looking at what the actual scope of work is and getting very detailed. I think the reason why we see a lot of barriers and hesitancy from these brands is that they hear Web3 and they don't know which of the thing you're speaking about and what it actually means. So I think the very first problem here is to define the problem by which you're offering a solution in this new space, right? And then with that, I think then comes mapping out what's the, not just roadmap, but the business model, which I think is another thing we don't talk enough about. We have roadmaps, but we need working financial models, right, to show how these things are revenue generating. Then you say, who are my partners, right? And then you start to map it out. So I think right now we're jumping to launches without fully defining the answers to the questions, which is not a helpful answer, but the only answer I can give.
It's a super helpful answer, and I think it's also important to really dive into that one point about the fact that it's important to be intentional about what you're doing and why, and understanding what makes sense for your brand versus what doesn't make sense for your brand. In addition to that, finding communities that really aligned with your brand tone and your values. We, at Crypto Chicks, we've candidly had a lot of brands approach us to partner that we feel are probably not the best aligned with our community, our vision of what we're building, and we're being really thoughtful about understanding who can we bring the strongest community to as a part of partnering with someone on a launch versus what would they be better partnered with on someone else, and how can we help facilitate that relationship or conversation? And so I think understanding, first of all, there's so many different facets of Web3 to begin with. What do you want to do? What makes sense for your brand? But then being really intentional to understand Web3 is a really close-knit community, and it can be really hard for brands to kind of dial back if they enter the metaverse, so to speak, in a way that isn't really viewed as accepted by the NFT community. We're very quick to judge, and not rightfully so in many instances, but it can be hard to come back from that. So being very intentional up front about the strategy for community growth and adoption and marketing with a launch, I think can be really make or break for a lot of brands. Z, do you have thoughts on that from the Gossape perspective?
No, yeah, I totally agree with what you said just now. And at Gossape Girl, we also really curate what kind of brands we want to partner with. We wanted to make sure that the brands that we partner with actually align with our mission, which is to bring inclusivity to the space. And at the same time, we also believe that adoption is really key to the Web3 space. That is why we wanted to make sure that the brands and the partners that we work with are impactful enough for the whole community, and also to make a long-lasting brand in the Web2 space. So yeah.
Zino, from the B2B perspective, how are you thinking about in these conversations with brands what makes sense for metrics for success when you're working with them?
Honestly, most small brands are not thinking about the B2B aspect of it. I've noticed a trend of fear combined with excitement, which is not a good combination to have. It can lead to very cool outcomes, but it's not usually a good financial decision. Usually what I've seen brands try to do is create digital twins, and they pay somebody to make it, or they try to develop something themselves. A lot of them try to make their own brand-specific coins, which, of course, having 1,000 followers on Twitter, it's not going to work out. So it's just, I would recommend having a very clear vision of what you want to establish, what you want to accomplish. Maybe talk to somebody who hates your brand, because they're the ones that are going to tell you the truth about what you need to be doing. Unless it's just a personal issue, right? But if it's another business, maybe not your direct competitor, but somebody who has some kind of pull in what's going on with you, just to figure out what you can do, what you can afford to do, and then make sure that you're not doing something just for the fear that you're going to miss out on things. I've seen companies waste weeks of, and by weeks I mean people working from 5 a.m. to 2 a.m., weeks of labor just building something that in the end is, one, not built for what they wanted to do in the first place, and then it just wears out their employees, wears out, if they're co-founders, they're not even getting paid for this. So it's just get your clear view, get someone to tell you the truth, and it has to be harsh, and if it's not harsh, it's probably not the truth. And then just make sure you're building with a good plan and you don't break your budget.
Yeah, one thing I would love to hear, maybe a little bit more specifics for people that haven't actually been a part of these partnership conversations before, is what is the relative scope of work for different types of activations? From a timeline perspective, are things taking months? Are they taking quarters? What's the relative cost depending on how intricate someone is building?
So for anything related to retail, I've seen a lot of Web3 native brands release collections really, really fast. And by that I mean like every 3 weeks or so. And I think that could work for the metaverse, but if it's a physical brand, a lot of things are still tied to the traditional fashion industry, which could be anywhere between 6 months to a year between the time of conception to the time that anything actually gets on the shelves, sometimes even longer than that. Of course, I'm not counting like Forever 21, H&M, or any fast fashion thing, but just traditional fashion things. So in terms of planning, I mean, it's going to obviously depend on your team size, your team experience, but if you're mapping out to the industry, it's going to be about 6 months to do everything right.
So one thing I would love to just hear from a broad perspective, ladies on the panel, what is one thing that you are most excited about? What's one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation as food for thought that you are really excited for about in the future?
Okay. I think for me, it's about taking a critical lens. I have found myself telling most people not to go ahead and just launch and jump in, but to really pull back in 30,000 feet, what they're doing, why they're doing this, who they're doing it for, right? So for me, it's very 30,000 feet. So I'm very excited actually about the market shifts that we've been happening right now. I think it's really important for our industry to start to figure out who are the innovators, who's going to stick it in there, and who's going to really be able to create. So I'm excited about all of us here in this room that are building together.
I love that. I think that's really important for us to not gloss over. Obviously, the market is something that people are incredibly anxious about right now, but I think that does give opportunity for people that are really building intentionally to have time to put resources into that, and people that are racing to launch just to capitalize on market opportunity will probably not feel as though they're in such a rush and can kind of take a step back and realize, does this make sense for my brand? Am I putting as much thought and effort into all of the upfront logistical details that go into pulling something off successfully without any of the snafus that can be hard to walk back from? Z, what about you?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think like with the current market situation right now, it forces people to like also think like, how can we make like a long-lasting brand, and at the same time also like, because like the space itself, like there's such a big pressure in a space. Like people would say, oh, when token, like when like merch, or like when like other things. But I think like the current market situation actually like forces like projects and creators to think about like what is the long term, like how can I provide a long-term value and also a long-lasting value, which is not only just like a short like spike of like things, short like FOMO of like certain like NFTs. So I think like that is like the important thing, and yeah, I think like that would be like a big like lesson learned, and like it will show like who are the creators and who are here to stay.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been interesting to see has been in this thought process of building a long-lasting brand, there is the Web3 pace of the world, and then there's the Web2 and Web1 pace of the world that many of the brands are operating at in terms of budgeting approvals, in terms of internal processes of sign-off, supply chain sourcing, all of this that we've been chatting about. And so I think now we have a little bit more of a time for the Web3 projects that are being pushed heavily by communities to move so fast, to iterate so quickly, to actually be really intentional about how can we operate with these brands that maybe aren't moving as quickly in terms of timelines as the Web3 community does, be able to meet in a happy ground in the middle, because there's a little bit less of a sense of urgency and a little bit more of an emphasis and focus on building for a scalable and sustainable future. Zino, what about you? Key thoughts and takeaways from the conversation.
Continue. I'm just here to make sure that you finish on time.
We have 30 seconds. Okay.
You have 30 seconds. Go.
Okay. Key takeaway, don't rush. There's a lot of opportunity in the B2B space that a lot of companies are not taking advantage of. Somebody please make a startup on this because it's probably going to work out pretty well. That's it.
It's amazing.
Shall we? Yeah. With that, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.